So, America has a brand new national policy for AI. It's got these really ambitious goals, right? But it kind of leaves out one massive detail. How are we supposed to actually do any of it? Well, today we're going to dig into a strategic document that says, hey, we've got the answer. It's arguing for a single, nationwide framework to put all this policy into practice. Let's get into it. Okay, so the whole thing kicks off with this really simple but powerful idea. The document basically draws a bright, bold line between the what and the how. Think about it. A policy can say, hey, you must protect children's privacy. That's the what. But it doesn't hand you the instruction manual, right? The actual playbook for building the tech and the processes to make it happen. And that gap, that's exactly where this document argues that even the best policies just fall apart in the real world.
And look, this isn't just some theory they're floating. They tie this gap directly to a pretty staggering number, 70%. That's the reported failure rate for major AI projects. The argument is crystal clear. If you don't have a solid roadmap for the how, even the most brilliant, well-funded AI initiatives are basically doomed from the start. All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll quickly touch on America's new AI rules. Then we'll get into that 70% failure problem. After that, we'll look at the proposed fix, this framework they call IPE. We'll see how it's supposed to plug those policy gaps, and then wrap up with why this has kicked off a major race for a new national standard. Okay, first things first. Let's just set the stage here. What we're talking about is a brand new top-level policy from the White House. This thing sets the ground rules for AI across the entire country. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. It's the philosophy behind this policy. While it lays out these big goals, it makes one absolutely massive decision about how to get there. It says no to creating a new federal AI agency. Instead, it basically throws the ball to the private sector and says, you guys figure out the standards, you figure out the how. And you gotta understand, this is a huge deal. It creates this massive power vacuum and a huge market opportunity right from the get-go. And that decision, well, that leads us straight into the core problem this document is trying to solve. What happens when you leave that implementation gap wide open? So the source actually gives this a name. They call it the policy gap. You know, it's that canyon between the big, shiny goal from the government and what actually has to happen on the ground inside a company. It's easy to say protect user data. It's a whole other beast to actually build, document, and manage the process that makes that happen day in and day out without fail. Right. And this is the critical takeaway here. The argument is that this isn't some minor detail we're talking about. No, this is the root cause of that staggering 70% failure rate. The analysis is basically saying that if you try to deploy super powerful, complex AI without a clear, structured plan, you're just setting yourself up to fail. It's a recipe for disaster. But, okay, this document doesn't just point out the problem and walk away. Nope. It proposes a very specific solution, a 6-step framework that's designed to come in and systematically fill that gap. It's called Integrated Process Excellence, or IPE for short. And the whole idea is pretty straightforward, really. It's a standardized, repeatable structure you can use for any complex process. You start by creating the right environment. You know, getting everyone on board. Then you define the process, you write it all down, you communicate it out, you measure it to make sure it's working, and, this is key, you never stop trying to make it better. All right, and this is really the heart of the whole argument. The claim isn't just that these 6 steps are, a good idea. The claim is that they are the specific how for the what laid out in that new national policy. Let's make this real. Take a look at the first example here, protecting children. The mandate is all about things like age checks and content controls. So the document argues you need to use IPE steps 2, 3, and 4. You have to define exactly how your age verification process works. Then you have to document it, so if anyone asks, you can prove it. And finally, you have to communicate it, so everyone involved knows the plan. See how that turns a vague goal into an actual manageable project? And you see this same pattern over and over again. You want to protect free speech? The document points to step 5, measure and control. That gives you a repeatable, auditable way to handle content decisions. And what about that big one, the pillar that calls for a unified national standard? Well, the source basically says, here you go, and positions the entire IPE framework as the answer. The whole idea is simple. For every policy what, there's an IPE process how. So you might be wondering, why the big push for this right now? Well, this is not just some academic paper. This is a real-world, high-stakes race to define the future of AI.
And it's all happening because a massive window of opportunity just flew wide open. Remember that huge decision we talked about? By saying no to a new federal agency and yes to industry standards, the White House basically created a vacuum. Now there's this urgent need for a common playbook that companies can use to show they're following the rules. And so the race is on. Who is going to define the unofficial standard for the entire country?
And this slide, this is basically IP's resume for the job. The document puts it forward as the #1 candidate to fill that vacuum. And look at the credentials. We're talking a 30-year track record. It's been battle-tested in over 200 organizations across huge industries like aerospace and pharma. Plus, it already lines up with existing standards bodies. The argument is simple. This isn't some brand new, untested idea. It's a proven system that's ready to go right now on a national scale. Yeah, this quote really nails the whole strategic play here. It completely reframes the White House policy. It's not some annoying new regulation you have to deal with. No, it's a giant market signal. It's the government basically saying, we have a huge national challenge, and we need a deployment playbook. And of course, the document says, we have that playbook. It's called IPE.
So when you look at it all together, the source makes a really compelling case, right? It offers a standardized, step-by-step solution to a super complex national problem. But it also leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on. What does it really mean when one company's private process becomes the unofficial rulebook for an entire nation's AI strategy?